Winter gardening for insects. I'm Hannah here at Essex Wildlife Trust, and I'm pleased to introduce our very own nature enthusiast and wildlife community ranger, John Atterwell. Those of you who've heard John speak before, you know you're in for a treat. He's incredibly knowledgeable about all things wildlife, passionate about nature, and has brilliant examples of the wonderful work that our communities have already been doing across Essex. So hopefully you'll not only enjoy this webinar and learn something, also come away with some practical tips. Over to you, John.
Hello, thank you for that lovely introduction, Hannah. That's amazing. So welcome to the Winter Gardening for Invertebrates webinar from the Urban Wildlife Champions and Essex Wildlife Trust. My name's John Atterwell. I'm the Community Ranger for the Trust. So I get to travel around the county helping community groups to look after their little green spaces and such like. So during these winter months, invertebrates seem largely dormant. We don't see terribly many pollinators on the wing into the winter months. But that's no reason that gardeners should be dormant as well. There's plenty to get out and do, including these medium-sized structural sort of projects like installing bug hotels like this one at Ipswich Road Open Space up in Holland-on-Sea. So here are some contrasting images of two fairly closely related invertebrates taken during the winter. At the bottom on the left, you can see in Philip Pressey's photo harlequin ladybirds gathered in their winter torpor, perhaps in an outbuilding or in a church. It looks like they've gathered on this piece of worked limestone, and that's where they'll spend the winter. And on the right was a photo I took in North Norfolk just a few weeks ago, just before Christmas, of a pine ladybird. And this ladybird was still active and hunting aphids on some shelter belt pines up on the North Norfolk coast. So two distinct strategies there, and you will realise that there are insects still active in winter. Another of those species that's still active are these rather wonderful creatures, the winter moths. You can see there the female winter moth unusually is wingless, similar to perhaps a more familiar species like the vapour moth, to which it's distantly related. And on the right you can see the male, his underside, as he'd perched on my window. And that was very much, as I say, just before Christmas in December. So there are still pollinators out there. So what can we do? In winter, we can recreate natural habitats. That's what our aim is. With things like bug hotels, bee hotels, we're trying to create those micro habitats that you'd find in the woods and meadows that you wouldn't necessarily find in our gardens. And we can offer habitats around rot and nutrient cycling that we wouldn't normally host perhaps in our garden, and we can replicate those natural processes to some extent. So the bug hotel, like that fantastic example you saw in the earlier slide at Holland-on-Sea, is a great place for creatures like this rather beautiful little beast. This is a common woodlouse. I like this photo because it's not often that you get to really look at the compound eyes of a woodlouse. I thought that gives a particularly good impression of their compound eyes, recalling an ancient trilobite or some such. But of course, they're not related to trilobites. They're actually terrestrial crustaceans, isopods as they're known. And the bug hotel will be used by isopods like this woodlouse and similar creatures, similar saprosilic, that's the name we give to creatures that feed on decaying wood, similar saprosilic invertebrates, some beetle larvae, isopods like this, and other creatures. The recyclers of the insect world, as it were. So building the bug hotel is a fun family activity to do in your garden, or alternatively in your community green space. So position your bug hotel in partial shade, or in some shelter, so out of strong winds, and so that it's not going to get very heated and dry out in high summer. Use pallets or bits of scrap wood as a base. Where you've cut away bits of the pallets, use bricks to support it, and stuff it with untreated bits of log, leaves, stones, bricks with holes in like these are great places for insects to find the little cubby holes they need to spend the winter. And things like these pine cones and bits of leaf litter will provide that food for the saprosilic invertebrates. But don't stuff it too hard, because there needs to be airflow through the structure in order to ventilate it properly. And you don't want to create anoxic environments in there. And make sure your hotel's roof is big enough to shelter the rest of the bug hotel, to keep most of the rain off. You're not aiming to keep it dry, but you're aiming to just keep most of the rain off, and make sure your bug hotel roof is big enough. And consider using a green roof, as the group at Ipswich Road in Holland-on-Sea have done. They've planted with a mixture of sedums and native wildflowers. And you can do that. There's no reason your bug hotel shouldn't have a green roof. And it will provide additional habitat for pollinators through the summer months. And so this rather magnificent beast, I'm sad to say it's not my photo, I wish it was. This is a lesser stag beetle. And lesser stag beetles, their larvae are saprosilic, and they can live in log piles, such as this one, this rather nice log pile by Scott Petrek, which is another photo from our photo library. So remember, we're simulating natural processes, and in any woodland, semi-natural woodland, if you go and have a walk there, you will see quite a lot of dead wood. And particularly if you go to a truly ancient and unmanaged patch of woodland, there are very few in this country, but if you do get a chance to visit one, you will see that dead wood, both standing and fallen, is a really important part of the habitat there. So providing a log pile can effectively substitute that for that in your garden, and it can provide a great habitat for saprosilic beetle larvae in particular, and other species. So greater stag beetles, which will be perhaps familiar to you if you live in Havering or else around Colchester, where this species does continue to maintain a stronghold. It's a truly magnificent insect, and its larvae rely on logs that have been upright and buried well into the ground. Their natural habitat is tree stumps, so standing deadwood is what they're after, but horizontal logs will suit the lesser stag beetle. And here is a greater stag beetle in this rather wonderful photo by Terry Whitaker. And I understand that Terry Whitaker did pose this photo when he took it, but there you can see the greater stag beetle on this piece of standing deadwood in the foreground, and behind it you can see he's got his fruit trees, he's got a foxglove in bloom, and a range of other native wild flowers in front of his log pile. And this is another photo that I found, and it just shows the unexpected things that can turn up in a log pile in the habitats that we create in our gardens. I worked briefly with hoverflies up in Scotland a couple of years ago, and we were always impressed by the diversity of life, from slime molds to amphibians to even small mammals that were making use of the pine rot holes that we'd created. And so wherever you do it, you can sometimes find some the unexpected in the log pile. You could try, if you've got a reasonably large space, and particularly if you've got a lot of brash that you need to get rid of, you could try a dead hedge. So dead hedges provide shelter for small mammals and invertebrates. They're arguably more attractive than fences, especially when the climbing plants, the bindweeds and the ivies start to take hold and grow over them. And it's something to do with that that dead wood and brash that you might generate in your garden or in your community space that you would feel looks too scruffy to lie around. But if you can make it into a dead hedge, that's a way of keeping it on site that's relatively tidy and that will create opportunities for wildlife. And be creative. This Gabion style seating at our wild local space in Malden provides lots of spaces for hibernating invertebrates in amongst those stones and bricks, and all of those stones and bricks inside the Gabion cage came from on site. So that's a great way of recycling what would otherwise be waste material. So do consider, when dealing with dead wood and stone, the possibility of using it to create habitat. So this is a bee hotel, and a bee hotel is distinctly different from a bug hotel. So don't get the two confused. So a bee hotel could be handmade, or it could be modified from an old bird nest box, or bought from any of our excellent nature discovery centres. There are, of course, other suppliers available too. And this is for bees to breed in. So they'll need sunshine. You don't want to leave your bee hotel in the shade like you might your bug hotel. Bees really do need sunshine to stay active while they're bringing pollen and other materials to those tubes. And so this is quite a large bee hotel, incorporating bits of bug hotel into its design. And this is at Fingering Hoe Wick Nature Reserve up near Colchester. And it really is well worth a look when you're up at Fingering Hoe Reserve. It's well worth checking out this bee hotel, because it is absolutely buzzing with red-tailed with red mason bees, and with various leaf cutters and tawny mining bees and all manner of rather wonderful solitary bees. And solitary bees, of course, although they don't have a colony structure with various castes and classes like workers and queens and what have you, they are quite gregarious in their nesting habitats in many cases. So although yes, they're solitary bees, there will be a lot of them together. They just won't be actively interacting to raise the same brood. Each female will have her brood in one of those tubes, or perhaps a single egg in one of those tubes. And solitary bees As I said, they provision their larvae with pollen, which they'll gather from all the pollinator-friendly flowers in your garden, and they'll stuff it into these tubes, and the larvae will then grow over winter or over the rest of the summer to emerge as a bee in spring. So here's a beautiful megachile bee, one of the leaf cutters. And so if you ever see these perfect semicircles cut out of your rose leaves, this rather wonderful bee may well be the culprit. If he wasn't carrying a leaf, you'd still know that he was a megachile, or a leaf cutter bee by the bristly hairs on the underside of his, I should say her, because it is a female, on the underside of her abdomen, which get covered in pollen, and they use that as their structure for carrying pollen rather than having pollen baskets. So this is a parasitic wasp at a bee hotel. So predators do get at your bee hotel occasionally. I know that great tits often take a keen interest in bee hotels. But this kleptoparasitic wasp here is a female, and you can see that the long black strand going downwards in the photo is her ovipositor sheath, and her actual ovipositor is positioned inside one of the holes. And so what she'll be doing is she'll be laying an egg on or near the bee larva inside, and her own larva will hatch from that egg, and it will consume both the pollen that the female bee has laid down for the young bee, for the larva, and probably the larva itself as well. But on the other hand, it is a rather fantastic looking insect, isn't it? And of course, solitary wasps like this do go to flowers, and they are pollinators in their own right. So they're not all bad. They can be interesting visitors. You can look at them as interesting visitors to your bee hotel. This design of a bee hotel is much simpler than some of the others. This is simply a piece of wood with some holes drilled in it, positioned in the car park at Langdon Hills Reserve. But if you do want to protect your bee hotel guests from that kind of parasitism and from winter predation by birds, you could consider taking your bee hotel apart and taking the cocoons. They have lovely silk cocoons, a little bit like moth cocoons, and you can take those out. Apart from the leaf cutters, they have a cover made of leaves that's really quite impressive. You can take those out, bring them indoors potentially. The jury's perhaps a little bit out about how good an idea this is, but you do protect the bees from predators, and if you're fortunate, you will, like me, get to share your house very briefly with wonderful, adorable looking creatures like this fantastic red mason bee, beautiful Osmia bicornis here, a photo taken after it emerged from cocoons from a bee hotel before being released on a mild spring day. So bees and butterflies tend to get a lot of the hype associated with pollinators, but among the most important pollinators in temperate climates are these. These are hoverflies. So they're not bees or wasps, although most species of hoverfly do to a greater or lesser extent imitate a bee or a wasp. They're not actually related. They are true flies. And you can see here two very common species that both have aquatic larvae. On the right, you can see the Batman hoverfly, so called because he has a Batman symbol emblazoned upon his thorax, such as you might see projected into the skies of Gotham City. And on the left, you can see the footballer named for his stripy shirt. So these hoverflies both have aquatic larvae, and hoverflies in general, which have a huge range of survival strategies for their larvae. Hoverflies like these are among our most important pollinators, really vital. They're generalist pollinators, so they will visit and pollinate a range of flowers. And we can simulate their natural habitats too in our gardens, using some simple artifice. So hoverfly lagoons like these were invented by Dr. Ellie Rotheray of the University of Sussex and the Buzz Club that she co-founded. And a hoverfly lagoon is rather wonderfully simple. It was inspired by work carried out in Scotland around hoverfly reintroduction programs. So aquatic hoverfly larvae like these are sometimes called rat-tailed maggots or long-tailed larvae. How you feel about the name rat-tailed maggot probably depends on how you feel about rats and or maggots. But here they are. I think they're rather fascinating little creatures. So that long tail that you can see there is a snorkel, which allows them to live in very low oxygen environments. These particular individuals belong to a rare northern species called the pine hoverfly, Blairophalax. So I've included them because they're quite a typical example of what a rat-tailed maggot looks like. So they eat the microorganisms that are grazing, that are digesting the dead wood in pine rot holes in this case. But tree rot holes are probably very important for a great many species. And so that's what we aim to replicate. So I drew this myself, would you believe? This work of art, I'm very proud of it. You can see half a milk bottle, or perhaps a more durable container. You could use a piece of ceramic or an old pot or pan or some such. And you can stuff it with leaves, stuff it fairly tightly with leaves, because these are going to be the substrate on which the food that the larvae are going to eat will themselves feed. So pack it quite strongly, quite solid with leaves. Add some moss around the top, and the more moss you have breaking the surface, that seems to keep the mosquitoes off your hoverfly lagoon. So moss breaking the surface is a good idea, as much of it as possible, and a couple of sticks sticking out, which will be landing pads for the hoverfly, like this one here. And place a tray of leaves for pupation around the bottom of your lagoon, so that the larvae, when they're ready to pupate, have access to a safe, dry, sheltered spot in which to do so. So you make sure there are drainage holes if you do use a tray of leaves at the bottom, and this will just ensure that your pupae aren't drowned. And remember to check in summer to make sure that the leaves don't dry out too, because that of course would be the end of your hoverflies. And do check out the website of the Buzz Club, because they will provide some information on how to monitor and how to contribute to ongoing citizen science regarding the survival of hoverflies and the importance of these artificial habitats. So I've just included this just to bring you up to speed with what I was doing up in Scotland a few years ago. And you can see here, this is a hoverfly lagoon that's been created in an old pine stump. And then on the right, just for completeness, is a picture of an adult Blairophalax, which of course is not a species you'll find in Essex. But I think they're rather sweet. They look in the photo they look a little like red-tailed bumblebees, but the size difference, because the pine hoverflies are so much smaller, I wonder if they really are trying to mimic that species. They presumably they must be. Um, so winter is also a great time to engage in some of those big infrastructure projects that you've been planning in your garden for some time. You could put in a wildlife pond, for instance. A wildlife pond is said by many to be the single best way of increasing the biodiversity of your garden. And if you build it in winter, by the time the spring comes around, it'll be ready to be colonized. Um, this pond here was built by Jenny Gifford and her volunteers with the 3G, the Greener Garden Growers, and this is in a private garden in Colchester. And note how they've used native planting around the margins. Um, they've provided shallow sides which allow egress for any mammal that might be unfortunate enough to fall in. And the emergent plants provide something for any odonata that might move in to climb up and emerge. Certain species of odonatas, such as large red damselflies, one of the earliest species of damselflies on the wing, a lovely black and red with little tiny gold highlights, drag damselfly that's um, that's up and about early in spring in May, and also the enormous southern hawker dragonfly, which might climb up one of those stems if you're really lucky. An absolutely fantastic beast to have in your garden. But winter, when wildlife is relatively quiet before the birds start nesting, is a good time to get in and do these medium-sized projects that you've had in mind for some time. It's a good time to put in your wildlife pond. And also make sure you avoid excessive tidiness. Though this is a cultivated border with some fantastic planting in it up at Holland-on-Sea. And you can see here how they've retained some of the hollow stems of their herbaceous plants through the winter, and those that they have cut they've left lying close to the original plant, and all of those are hibernacular for invertebrates. They're all places that invertebrates in various life stages can spend the winter, particularly those hollow stems are really vital. So if you can, do try and let those persist into the winter months. And if you keep a meadow, which obviously does need cutting in autumn, try to leave perhaps some little corners or some little tufts just to persist until spring. So you've got that arc, as it were, for the inverts to shelter in until the spring. And also be kind to the ivy in your garden if you're fortunate enough to have any mature ivy. Here on the left is some rather wonderful mature ivy at Ipswich Road, Holland-on-Sea. And that's there, and you can see it providing year-round cover for birds and mammals. You can see it providing winter hibernating opportunities for small tortoiseshell and peacock butterflies. You can see it providing winter berries that are an invaluable source of natural food for so many species of bird. And perhaps most excitingly of all, particularly in the context of this webinar, ivy also hosts its own solitary bee, the ivy calites, which loves its flowers and is one of the last solitary bees to emerge as an adult in the season, coming around in October, in August, September, even into October, and nectaring like this one here on the green flowers of ivy. And red admiral butterflies, as they're warming up to migrate, those that still migrate, they do love these flowers too. So yeah, be nice to ivy, and remember that it doesn't kill healthy trees. And if the tree is very unhealthy, remember that standing deadwood is a great habitat as well. So some butterflies overwinter as adults, although these tend to be exceptions rather than the rule. Many winter as larvae, which is why it's so vital to leave, as I say, those little corners of your meadow and those little bits of herbaceous plants standing. But one or two, well, several species in Britain do overwinter as adults, and they'll overwinter in tree holes, in nest boxes, perhaps in your bug hotels, and even in outbuildings like sheds and bird hides. So do keep an eye out for some of those, like this very sleepy looking small tortoise shell, and this possibly one of the most beautiful insects in the UK. This is a peacock butterfly, Glaeosaia. So this is one of a number that I raised up in Granton-on-Spey in Scotland. But these too spend the winter as adults, sometimes bedding down as early as July, because they do still have just a single brood in this part of their range. And they will set themselves up in the corner of a shed. And if a dangerous predator, such as a wood mouse, dares to approach them, they will produce otherworldly hissing noises and flash these brilliant eye spots at the predator. And mice do apparently reliably find it pretty terrifying, which is quite exciting, because of course otherwise they would be a fantastic meal for a mouse. But they're able to protect themselves with bluff and bluster to keep the mice and other small mammalian predators away. I can't imagine it working on a determined house spider though. So some pollinators do remain on the wing in winter, particularly hoverflies. So you might come across marmalade hoverflies and perhaps even a few other species, some of the Aristolini you might happen upon flying in winter. And on warm days during the winter, sometimes butterflies wake up from hibernation and need nectar. So some butterflies like this red admiral have increasingly been spending their winter in Britain. Many red admirals, of course, migrate, but this one was probably overwintering and was woken up by a beautifully warm day at the beginning of February last year. And here he is on the snowdrops that grow there. So allowing anything to flower in winter and thinking about the winter season in your planting is well worth it, and you will help out creatures like this lovely red admiral butterfly, and also keep some of the hoverflies going through the winter. And also at this time of year, we're getting towards the time to start planting seeds in our gardens or planting seeds in seed trays in our greenhouses. Do consider our pollinators when you're choosing plants to grow from seed. Plants like lavender, which is enjoyed by a huge range of bees and butterflies. Verbena too is enjoyed by a lot of butterflies. I'm not one to encourage only native flowers, not at all. I know that some people are purists in that area, but I'm not. Things like nicotiana and honeysuckle can both be grown from seed, and these are enjoyed by some of the very long-tongued hawk moths that'll be on the wing in the summer months at night. And you could consider growing things like nasturtiums even as sacrificial food plants for your cabbage whites, like this magnificent large white in this photo by Megan Lowe from WildNet again. And also, as a birder, I was going to mention birds inevitably at some point. It is a great time of year to keep an eye on your garden birds. Just as these cold snaps start happening, that's when garden birds are most in need of the supplementary food that we provide so much of for them. So do keep an eye out for your garden birds. The RSPB's Big Garden Birdwatch in January, of course, is a bit of a highlight of the garden birdwatching calendar. And it's just fantastic to take that opportunity to sit in your garden and record what birds you see, and just take an hour to just watch your garden, because that's something that I think a lot of us don't do often enough. And then submit your sightings to the RSPB and the BTO, and contribute to one of the longest running citizen science schemes that is going. So that's usually on the third weekend in January. Yeah, so thank you very much, and I hope that this has given you a few ideas for things you can do in your garden during these colder months. This is a view here of the lovely Ipswich Road paddock in Holland-on-Sea once again. So yeah, thank you very much. As I say, I'm John Attiwell from Essex Wildlife Trust, Community Ranger. And do check out our pledge to support our pollinators, our current Nature Neighbours campaign through our website. That's well worth engaging with, and get out and perhaps apply some of these ideas. The Buzz Club has full details of how to create a hoverfly lagoon. And obviously the RSPB Big Garden Birdwatch is a fantastic and huge scale bit of citizen science that's coming up. So thank you all, and thank you to our urban wildlife champions who've let us showcase some of their projects today, including at Holland-on-Sea, Ipswich Road, and at our wild local space in Malden. And yeah, thank you very much. All the best. And this is where I find out I haven't been recording.